Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about an inspector calls. So we are now on Act 3, and the stage directions are there. Exactly as at the end of Act 2, Eric is standing just inside the room, and the others are staring at him. So here we've got Eric Burling, who's going to be interviewed by the inspector as the last character, even though he was not the last person that Eva Smith met in real life. That was Mrs. Burling. But remember that Priestley has swapped over these characters, these last two characters, for dramatic effect. Okay, so let's listen to some audio first, and then we'll go through it as usual.
Oh, look here. I don't believe it. I won't believe it.
Mother, I begged you to stop, but would you?
You all know, don't you?
Yes, we know.
Eric, there must be some mistake. You don't know what we've been saying.
It's a good job for him he doesn't, isn't it?
Why?
Because Mother's been busy blaming everything on the young man who got this girl into trouble. And saying he shouldn't escape and should be made an example of.
Now, that's enough, Sheila.
You haven't made it any easier for me, have you, Mother?
But I didn't know it was you. I never dreamt. Besides, you're not that type. You don't get drunk.
Of course he does. I told you he did.
Oh, you little sneak.
That's not fair. I could have told her months ago, but I didn't. I only told her tonight because I knew it was bound to come out. So I thought she might as well know in advance. Don't forget, I've already been through it.
Sheila, I simply don't understand your attitude.
Neither do I. If you'd had any sense of loyalty...
There'll be plenty of time when I've gone for you all to adjust your family relationships. But now I must hear what your son has to tell me. When did you first meet this girl?
One night last November.
Where?
In the Palace Bar. I'd been there an hour or so with 2 or 3 chaps.
What happened then?
I began talking to her and stood her a few drinks. I was rather far gone by the time we had to go.
Was she drunk too?
She was a bit, chiefly because she'd not had much to eat that day.
You went to her lodgings that night?
It seems I insisted. I'm not very clear about it, but afterwards she told me she didn't want me to go in, but that... Well, I was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. And that's when it happened. And I don't even remember. That's the hellish thing. Oh, my God, how stupid it all is.
Eric, how could you?
Sheila, take your mother along to the drawing room.
I want to stay.
You heard what I said. Go on, Sybil.
Come on, Mother.
When did you meet her again?
About a fortnight afterwards.
By appointment?
No. And I couldn't remember her name or where she lived. It was all very vague. But I happened to see her in the Palace Bar.
And you took her home again?
Yes. And this time we talked a bit. She told me something about herself, and I talked too. I told her my name and what I did.
And you made love again?
Yes. I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport.
So you had to go to bed with her.
I'm old enough, aren't I?
Go on.
We saw each other a few more times, and then she told me she was going to have a baby.
And of course she was very worried about it.
Well, yes, so was I. I was in a hell of a state about it.
Did she suggest that you ought to marry her?
She didn't want me to marry her. Said I didn't love her.
So what did you propose to do?
Well, she hadn't a job, and didn't feel like trying again for one, and she'd no money left. So I insisted on giving her enough money to keep her going, until she refused to take any more.
How much did you give her altogether?
I suppose about £50 all told.
£50? Where did you get £50 from? Well?
From the office.
My office?
Yes.
You stole it?
Not really.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry, Eric.
This isn't my fault.
But I simply have to know what's happening.
I'll tell you what's happening. He's admitted he was responsible for the girl's condition. And now he's telling us he supplied her with money he stole from my office.
Eric.
I intended to pay it back.
We've heard that story before. How could you have paid it back?
I'd have managed somehow. I had to have some money.
You damn fool. Why didn't you come to me?
Because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble.
Don't talk to me like that.
Oh.
Your trouble is you've been spoiled.
And my trouble is that I haven't much time. You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone. Just one last question. That's all. The girl discovered that this money you were giving her was stolen, didn't she?
Yes, that was the worst of all. She wouldn't take any more, and she didn't want to see me again. But how did you know that? Did she tell you?
She told me nothing. I never spoke to her.
She told Mother.
Sheila, she told you. Did she come here? No, she couldn't have. She didn't know I lived here. What happened, Mother? Don't look like that. Tell me what happened.
After she'd done with you, she went to your mother's committee for help. Your mother refused that help.
Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. You killed her. And the child she'd have had too. My child.
Eric, please.
You killed them
Eric,
both.
please.
Damn you.
No,
Eric,
I
don't.
understand.
You don't understand anything.
You hysterical young fool!
You never did. You never even tried.
Back off!
Listen to me.
Okay, so that's probably a good point to stop. So let's just go back all the way to the beginning. So you may have noticed there that the audio version cuts it down quite a bit. So let's just make sure that we are clear where we are. So this page, you can just pause the video and read through this. We don't need to say much. Just a reminder that the acts are continuous. If you notice in the audio version, there's no gap between the acts, okay? So Eric comes in and nothing much we need to analyze here as such, but by all means, pause the video and read through these lines. Except to say that, notice Priestley uses the characters, quite often Sheila actually, to just summarize what's happening, just to remind the audience what's going on, but without it being too obvious. So here, this is a summary of what Mrs. Burling has said in the previous act. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. And then here again, you can just pause the video and read through these lines because quite a lot has been skipped by the audio. But here the main point being about him getting drunk and he's saying, oh, you little sneak. And then the inspector saying, you can sort out your problems when I've gone. But notice he's telling off Sheila about being a sneak. But then the first thing he says is, can I have a drink first? Okay, let's move on to the next page. And then this page is fairly straightforward. You can just pause the page, the video, and read through it. So when he asks for a drink, his father says no, but the inspector actually says, look, he needs a drink right now, so let him. And then this bit here shows that he's fully familiar with the decanter. So decanter is a container for holding alcoholic drink. The word decanter actually has technical meanings. It's designed to hold wine properly and keeping it fresh and so on. You don't need to worry too much about that. If you want to look that up yourself as a matter of interest, you can do, but we don't need to worry about that. And now the inspector starts interviewing him. When did you meet her and where and so on. Okay, so this page is fairly straightforward. For a start, we can note this word squiffy, which was mentioned in Act 1 by Sheila, but this is Eric saying that he was a bit squiffy. And they met and he bought her a few drinks. And then the inspector says, why has she gone there? And Eric says, she's not the usual sort. She didn't know what to do. Now, there was some woman who wanted to help her go there. So that line's a bit mysterious. We don't know what it means exactly. It could be some woman saying to her, look, if you're hard up, then you can maybe meet someone here who might be able to give you some money. Priestley never spells it out. And we can certainly be sure that this was not the sort of thing that Eva Smith wanted to do. Well, no woman wants to do that. It's only desperation that leads people to do that sort of thing. But and he doesn't understand why she was even there. And then he went back with her, insisted on going back. Now, this page is more confusing. So, firstly, he says he was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. Well, that's a strange thing to say for a start, because I would hope most people, most men, wouldn't turn nasty just because they've had a few drinks. So, this is more him revealing his own personality, really. Eric is he's strange. I mean, on the one hand, he doesn't come across as a very nasty person. He's one of the people who changes over the play, and yet he's kind of saying this. It may just be to do with him being spoiled and used to getting his own way, and that sort of links to class structure. Kind of middle and upper class people tend to have a sense of entitlement that lower class people, working class people don't have. And then he basically made her let him in, and that's when it happened. So notice it's all very indirect. So that might be partly because it was written back then when people weren't used to talking about such things openly. So, whether we define this as rape or not, that's something that you can think about. It's a possible debate to have in class. We can certainly say that it was non-consensual, and then you can pause the video and just read through this page yourselves. And then the inspector says, "When did you meet her again?" Actually, just going back to this line here, he says that she didn't want him to go in, but he was in that state, and he says, "I threatened to make a row." Now, what's interesting about that? What's interesting is that at that time, that threat made her let him in. Whereas nowadays, I would hope and expect and think that it would be the other way around. That actually, if he made a row, he would be the one to get into trouble. People would come out and say, "Why are you forcing yourself on this young woman?" So that's an interesting contextual point that you could maybe think about. Okay, so let's go back to this page here. Okay, and then, but you can see she didn't want to see him because they didn't arrange to meet, but he happens to see her again and they have more drinks. But now this time they do go back, and this time it seems to be a bit more consensual. So it's very difficult to understand what's going on here and what the point is that Priestley is making. I think the reason why we're confused is that times have changed, and I think the how we would behave in this situation nowadays, or how we would recommend people to behave, would be quite different to back then. But certainly, the second time around, it looks like she was a little bit happier to take him home for whatever reason. We don't know what she was thinking. So here, this page is. You may want to pause this page and read it through carefully, because so he's talking about how he's old enough to be married, and what's interesting about these words? Who said something similar to this? So fat old tarts. So that's the sort of language that Gerald Croft used earlier on. And then the inspector said you can sort yourselves out later. And now clearly the relationship has become more consensual, and they're starting to see each other. And now we learn that he has made her pregnant, and of course they were both worried about it. And then here we have the thing about her not wanting to marry him because he's too young, treated me as if I were a kid. Although if that's the case, then why did she probably shouldn't have taken him back or had an affair with him. But obviously he had already forced himself on her. And actually, as it says there, they were about the same age. So it's more a difference of mentality, of maturity than actual age. Okay, and then this is where we learn that he gave her some money, but it wasn't really his to give. We're going to find out that so he gives her £50, And Berling is saying, where did you get that money from? And now we're going to find out that he stole the money, but he's going to pretend that he didn't steal it because he was going to pay it back. But how would he pay it back? He wasn't working or anything. So basically, he would have got it from his father and given it back to his father. And then you can just pause the video here and read through these lines. It's mostly just kind of plot and story, what's going on here, continuity scenes, so we know what's going on. So here Berling kind of summarizes what's happened to Mrs. Berling. So notice that as a story goes on, whether it's a novel or a play, you can speed up a little bit. At the beginning, it's much more confusing. You don't know who the characters are. You don't know what's going on. But once you're about halfway through and beyond, you kind of know what's going on and you can skip through a lot quicker than at the beginning. And then, so this is, you can just pause the video here and read through this. He's just explaining how he took the money. But this line's interesting. You must give me a list of those accounts. I've got to cover this up as soon as I can. So you can see how these middle class people who think they're meant, well, he's a magistrate and all that, but their first instinct is always to cover up. And here, this line here, again, more evidence that this family really don't know much about each other, despite that initial impression at the beginning with the dinner and at first glance, all looking very happy and close together. So Eric says, because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. And then this page as well, you can pause the video and read through the lines. So here, Berling is saying what we said earlier, that he's just spoilt, really. And you'll be able to divide the responsibility. So there's another quote about responsibility. We'll cut that out when we do the summary. And then we find out that once Eva Smith found out about the money being stolen, she refused to take it. So she's the most moral and principled person in this whole story. And then Eric wonders how the inspector knew. And obviously, we already know this from Mrs. Berling. Okay, so this page is important. So Eric's wondering how on earth Mrs. Berling knew, how his mother knew. And he's saying, did she come here to the house? How could she have known? And obviously, we know it's because she went to see the charity organization. And so that's we've got there. And the mother refused to help. And then obviously, these lines are really important. Eric, nearly at breaking point. Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. Yes, and you killed her. And the child she'd have had too. My child, your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you, damn you. Now, here, you could also analyze this in quite a lot of detail in terms of form and structure. So notice the dashes, the repetition. These are techniques that Priestley is using, and obviously the actor then acts them out to show his anger, his confusion. And okay, finally, Mrs. Berling is getting distressed. But again, I don't think she's distressed about Eva Smith, really, or even her own grandchild. It's more just this situation with her son. I didn't know, I didn't understand. And the funny thing is, even now, after she's learned that she's killed her own grandchild, towards the end, she's not going to change. She's not going to admit any responsibility. Okay, so let's go to the next page. Actually, I think that's where we stopped. So let's listen to a bit more audio.
Me. This girl died a horrible death, but each of you helped to kill her. And don't ever forget that. But then I don't think you ever will. Remember, Mrs. Berling, you turned her away when she most needed help. You refused her even the pitiable little bit of organized charity you had in your power to grant her. Eric, remember what you did.
My God, I'm not likely to forget.
You used her for the end of a stupid, drunken evening. as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. You, Miss Burling.
I had her turned out of a job. I started it.
You helped and didn't start it. Mr. Burling. You started it. She wanted 25 shillings a week instead of 22 and sixpence. You made her pay a heavy price for that. And now she'll make you pay a heavier price still.
Inspector, I'd give thousands. Thousands.
You're offering the money at the wrong time. No. I don't think any of you will forget. Nor that young man Croft, though he at least had some affection for her and made her happy for a time. Well, Eva Smith's gone. You can't do her any more harm, and you can't do her any good either. You can't even say, I'm sorry, Eva Smith.
That's the worst of it.
Well, remember this. One Eva Smith has gone. But there are millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us. With their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives, with what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We're members of one body, responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will soon come when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night.
Okay, so that's a good point to stop there because this is a key speech. But let's just go back to where we were. Okay, so this is where we were. So you can pause the video and read through this carefully, but we'll be picking out some quotes from here. So the inspector just summarizing, each of you helped to kill her. So these are keywords we'll pick out, emotive language, and the inspector just summarizing there. So yeah, so this you can just kind of read through yourselves. And then, I mean, Sheila takes responsibility at least for starting it, but actually the inspector says, no, it was you, Mr. Burling. And just for the sake of a few pennies. And then Burling says, oh, I'd give thousands. But the truth is, he wouldn't. He would do the same thing again because he doesn't change at the end of the play, as we'll see. And then the inspector summarizing here as well. So again, you can pause the video and read through that. And Sheila is crying. So this speech here, we'll just have a quick look at it now, but then we'll go through it again in more detail in the summary section. So yeah. So let's just go through this here. So one Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us. So firstly, just a reminder about the connotations of this name. So Eva, Eve, Adam and Eve, mother of mankind. Smith is a very common surname. So just like here as well, in the male version, John Smith. So the fact that Eva Smith stands for all women and all men actually as well. And we've got exaggeration and hyperbole here because millions and millions and millions ends up as being trillions, which is not quite even the whole human population nowadays is only 8 billion, and back then it would have been much less than that. So yes, we are talking about millions of people suffering, working class, but not millions and millions and millions. So that's hyperbole. Here we've got listing lives, their hopes and fears. So a triplet there. And we don't live alone. So what kind of a word is that? Emotive language. We are members of one body. So that is a metaphor that if one part of the body hurts, if even your little finger hurts, your whole body hurts. You can't think of anything else. We are responsible for each other. So in a way, that one sentence there summarizes the main theme of this play of responsibility for each other. Obviously, Mr. Burling doesn't agree with that, but the Inspector Gould, he's the mouthpiece of Priestley. So Priestley putting forward his socialist views here in the philosophy. And I'll tell you that the time will soon come when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. So what technique is that, and what is he talking about? So remember, this play is set in 1912, performed in 1945. Yeah, so he's talking about the World War One, 2 years later in 1914, and actually the play is written just after the end of the Second World War. So 2 wars there, fire and blood and anguish, which are both literal and metaphorical for the suffering of the 2 world wars, all the people killed, all the blood that was shed. Okay, so we'll stop there for this video and we'll carry on in the next video. So I'll just end with this slide as always. If you found this video useful, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I'll see you in the next video where we'll carry on with Act 3, the last act of Inspector Calls.